this is the first of many interviews I'm going to do, and I'm just so excited to hear what everyone's going to say and everybody's insights and how everyone's feeling. Like, this feels really elevating and really great. Why do you think it's important to celebrate International Women's Day?
It's a very important day to just like remember everything that we have done and that we are doing to proceed and reach equality.
We need to look at the past, where we once were, who we once were, and how we had to live, what we couldn't do, and then look at right now, how far we've come, the things that we can do, the things that we want to do, and then look ahead at where we can be in years to come. So I think it's so important to look back and see the progression that's been made, and then look ahead for even more progression from here.
I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that we're not yet equal as men and women in today's society. So that's the base. That's the reason we have the day, right? Otherwise, there probably wouldn't be one.
Yeah.
And I hope that this day hopefully can be a day both to celebrate, as you said, the achievements that are actually being done, despite parity being far away, but most importantly, to force us to move even faster, because otherwise, why celebrate if we're not moving even faster than we are today?
The more we actually speak about a reality that I think some people might sort of take for granted now is the status quo. I think maybe some of us or some of our relatives will remember a lived experience that looked very differently. And I think speaking about it and, acknowledging the progress and the incredible change, but also acknowledging where we're coming from and in this short period of time is important to continue to propel change moving forward.
I think what it is essentially it's taking a moment, and it's only a day. I mean, it's not a big amount of time, but it's taking a moment to really think about what do women bring to our world, to our society, and celebrating that. Not just celebrating, actually, because this year's theme is break the bias, and I think that's such a powerful thing to be thinking about, because there are so many ways in which women encounter bias, and I am absolutely certain that I've encountered only a very, very tiny part of what that looks like. There are women in the world who face so many barriers and so much just difficulty to go about doing some of the things that I take for granted. I can get in my car and I can drive wherever I want, and I can buy, within reason, whatever I want. And I have a job and people listen to me at work. And all of these things are not universal truths for all women in the world. And it's heartbreaking, but it is also an amazing catalyst for why we need to be aware of this and be thinking about, okay, what can I impact? What's in my world? Who are the women that I can give a platform to, that I can really raise up, so that as a whole society, as a world, that we live in, we are doing everything we possibly can to make sure that we live in a more equal world.
Have you faced any barriers or encountered any bias in your career due to being a woman, do you think? And if so, how have you overcome that?
But funnily enough, I had an interesting journey that I first worked in the Nordics, which is a very kind of equal society in many ways. But I faced some, I faced some barriers there in the workplace with regards to, kind of being taken maybe also seriously sometimes as a young woman. But then I transferred to work in the Middle East, where I was mainly working in Saudi Arabia, which is, probably like has one of the, bottom spots in the gender index in terms of gender equality. And there, life is gender segregated in itself. You have to wear an abaya, you have to, you're only allowed to sit in a family section in the restaurant, where all the women are sitting. Like, you cannot sit next to a man in the, in the car front seat. It's extremely segregated. But for whatever reason, I actually found there that I had a lot more kind of support of my career, and, even the the locals and people who are used to this kind of more gender segregated environment were extremely supportive of like women's careers and making sure that women have a voice, and making sure that in every meeting they're asking the opinion of all the women rather than kind of shutting them off. And I actually experienced a lot more kind of support and trying to like bring up women in those workplaces. So it was just a really interesting juxtaposition for me that, sometimes your immediate environment, what you see right in front of you, might still translate differently into kind of your experience that you go through.
Absolutely. I've faced all sorts of interesting experiences as a woman in sales coming up in my early career, and then, a woman in sales leadership, the rooms that you find yourself in, the conferences that you attend. It's been really interesting, and you compound the fact that I'm a woman with the fact that I'm also like miniature. Like I'm 5'2" and 90 pounds. Like I'm like a tiny woman, and I'm a woman of color. And so, can kind of picture me in a sales leadership conference downtown Toronto. It's like a sea of like 6-foot blue suits, former professional athletes, and like little old me. How I think there is a tenacity and a resilience that comes with being a salesperson that really translates to sort of combating the biases and things that are not great but expected and natural, again, with the progress that we're making so quickly. I think really sort of committing to be the best I can possibly be at the job that I have at the time. So whether that was, an individual contributor, like an account executive, like doing my best to be the best, to, sort of swim in that lane, whether or not people wanted to support me, coach me, believe in me, sort of like proving people wrong to the point that like I demanded that same level of coaching and support, which continued to sort of up my game.
I would say like I'm still very early in my career, but I used to play football when I was younger, and I went in a football class in my upper secondary school. And, it's like the most vulnerable time of your life when you're trying to like become who you are today and like trying to figure out what kind of paths do you have. And during that time, when I played football, I was told that I could never be as fast, never be as strong, and I was never going to be as good as the guys. And in that, I found some strength, of course. And I became one of the best instead. So I think like never doubt yourself and try to like just believe in yourself if no one else does.
I think so, and I think it's likely that all women have in some way, to some degree. I think for me, the biggest thing has been sort of encountering or being given feedback that felt like it was quite gendered, or like it wouldn't be maybe given to a man in the same position. And I also, especially earlier on in my career, experienced times when I was given feedback that felt like it was saying, be more like a man, rather than, be more myself in the best possible way. Like, I'm quite an introvert by nature. I tend to listen, I tend to kind of think and reflect, and then sort of form my opinion and make a decision kind of based in that in a more collaborative way. And I've often worked in teams where I'm one of the only women, and where there are more men who kind of prefer a more like debatey, competitive way of communicating, who want to talk a lot, and where it's been a lot harder to kind of get the space to contribute. And I had feedback that was like, you should speak up, and if somebody interrupts you, interrupt them, and be more like confident and sort of out there in these meetings. And I tried. I was like, okay, I'll try, and it it was like wearing somebody else's jacket. Like it wasn't me. And I think what I've learned is that actually it's much better to try and create spaces where it's possible for diverse voices to speak, rather than try and make everyone this sort of have this homogenous way of communicating that actually doesn't work for potentially half the people in the group.
What is an important message that you would like to send out to young women thinking about their careers?
This comes from the heart, and it comes from having faced so many women getting, into situations with men would never have to go through just because they are women. So being pushed down, being asked to do things which you would ask a woman to do, but not a man, or whatever it is. And it's a famous Swedish quote, freely translated: "Don't take any shit."
You can do anything you want to do. You can do it. There's a way and a means to do everything. You don't have to go to university, but you can go to university. You can get a job, you can do apprenticeships, literally reach for the moon, because the world is your oyster and nobody can tell you that you can't do something. And they will tell you that you can't do something, but then you have to dare to prove them wrong. You can do anything, so just do it.
I would say that my advice is to establish themselves a brand so they can evolve over time, because like you never know who's going to be in that meeting room, who are they going to look like, do they have the same experience as you have? So like always believe in yourself, be strong, and remember that you have a voice as well.
What can happen growing up for women is that society and the kind of expectations of people around us as we're sort of going through puberty and adolescence and entering womanhood is that we hear messages like women should be less aggressive, that they should be kind and nice and good. And those messages can actually really affect the confidence and the kind of self-esteem of women as they're entering this really kind of critical time in their careers, kind of starting out, in a way that doesn't seem to happen as often to men. The messages to men, younger boys and men, tend to be more like, be confident and be boisterous, and boys will be boys, and those kinds of things. And I think that creates a disparity in early career, especially of where women can feel less confident and kind of less able to sort of speak for themselves and be themselves. And so when I'm working with younger women, I tend to kind of, first of all, try and encourage them to embrace getting stuff wrong and kind of failing, because oftentimes, again, speaking from my own experience, it can feel like you have to be perfect as a woman, and that anything less than that is not going to be good enough. And so actually putting something out there when it doesn't feel like it's quite ready, or just embracing what you've learned from a mistake and talking to people about that kind of helps normalize that, and makes it a bit easier to sort of let go of that perfection thing and sort of be yourself.
Keep a really open mind. Again, like there's been a lot of change, and spaces that were predominantly male dominated, like sciences or sales or executive leadership, we come through an education system that's still trying to catch up to the reality of the change and progress that's been made. So I would say keep a really open mind, try things and see what you like. You might love being a people manager. You might hate being a people manager. You might love marketing, but maybe you're actually a salesperson. There's some stigmas that are rooted in sort of the olden times, I think, that having an open mind can actually open up paths that are maybe unexpected.
So, I think one of the advice my mom always gave me was that, make sure that you're not dependent on anyone, whether it's like your husband or your job. So for me, what that means is, or the advice I would give for young women is that make sure you start saving and investing immediately at the start of your career, right? So your career is one thing, and you should kind of be able to pursue your passions and your interests. But a lot of time that might not equate with like the financial benefit. And there might be times in your career when you want to take a break, whether it's for family reasons or personal reasons. So I think it's really important to, make sure that you set yourself up for being independent financially as much as possible. So, like, I think as a woman, if you can have that financial independence, that will increase your confidence so much more and make you so much more successful in your career as well. Because you'll be able to, like, also, you won't be afraid to speak up and use your voice, thinking that, oh, what will my, let's say, boss think or my peers think, and worry about your standing in the company from your employer from that point of view. If you feel that, I'm not dependent on this employer for my livelihood and for my kind of basic needs.
Tell me about a woman that inspires you.
I have obviously my wife. So I think she's having a baby. She's having a baby in 2 weeks. Which I'm incredibly proud of. She also works unbelievably hard as well. And I think that's every day I'm impressed about her dedication to not only she's 8 months pregnant and everything that brings with it, but also despite that is still working. It's actually her last day of work today, but it's still working and giving it everything that she has right up until finishing up on maternity leave as well.
I would say like a famous woman that inspires me is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who sat on the Supreme Court of the US as the first woman, and there's a documentary on her. She was just a powerhouse. She was really instrumental in pushing Roe v. Wade through, which was reproductive rights for women, which for its time was groundbreaking, and it's still being challenged today. She passed away last year, and left a big hole in, I think, the American justice system. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But more personally, I mean, all the women that I am close with inspire me. I would say I have a cousin who's CEO of a really big hedge fund in the States, and it is not easy in the States to be a woman hedge fund CEO, much less a Black woman hedge fund CEO.
A woman that inspires me is not somebody that anyone's going to know. She is my great auntie Hetty. She was a fashionista, so she's no longer with us, but she was a complete fashionista. Up until she was about 98 years old, she had her nails done, her hair was done. She worked in Jigsaw, which sort of during wartime, just before the war, was like super high-end store. You name it, she wore it. She looked amazing. Then in the war, in World War II, obviously all the men are on the front line, and there was no prison guards because they all had to be elsewhere fighting for the country. So lots of women got called up to do various jobs that were not very pleasant most of the time. And she got called up to be a prison guard in a maximum security prison.
Amazing.
And my great auntie Hetty, like when I say she was a fashionista, I mean fashionista of the time, of like the 1930s, 40s, 20s. And she used to tell us stories of working in this prison, which was absolutely not what she wanted to do, but she never complained. She just did it, got on with it, because that's, at the time it was pulling together. She was very patriotic, and she knew that she was doing her bit for herself, her fellow people within her country, and the future people that at the time weren't alive, like me or like you. It had to be done. And then when the war was over, she went straight back into working in fashion, and I just think that's so cool. Like, what a woman.
Without hurting the feelings of my beloved girlfriend or my adored mother, in the spirit of International Women's Day, I would say Melinda French Gates, and that's after reading her book, The Moment of Lift. I strongly recommend everyone to read it. If not for any other day, why not for International Women's Day? Because it does paint you the actual picture of how things are moving and how different things are out there from what you might think. And it made me go from this, I guess things are pretty good and moving in the right direction, etc., to becoming more, not sure if this is the right word in English, but militant about like progress.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've also done a lot of reading, but not this particular book, which I definitely will, to see the shift in my mindset between having nice conversations to action, call to action, measures. Like that is for me the difference between graduating from child to adult in this conversation. And it's fascinating. And I'm really glad that people are so keen to be on board. What does working at Memo as a woman mean to you?
So it's good that I bring some diversity to the team, especially because I'm working in the product team.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like I think 3 women or so. Oh no, maybe 5 now out of 35 or something. So yeah, it's really nice to bring some diversity. And you are surrounded mostly by men indeed, but that's not a problem for me. I like that as well. But I don't feel treated differently or anything. So no, it really feels good for me. And I like indeed to bring that diversity.
Working at Memo as a woman means generally that we can do anything. Like I can do anything. I don't come from a tech background. I always thought people that worked in tech or corporate jobs were like business people, and they wore like suits, and they were the people that you see getting on the train with their suits and their trainers, and typically, maybe mostly men, I thought, worked in the corporate world or the tech industry. And for me, being a female working at Memo means like that's not the case. Actually, pretty much my whole team is female in the UK. Oh, there are males, obviously, but we're largely female. And I just think it's super cool. It was an area that was just so alien to me up until sort of October last year.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just means once again that you can do anything and you can enjoy your job in a completely different industry that you didn't necessarily plan to be in when you were 7 years old.
Yeah.
World is your oyster.
Amazing. What do you think men can do to help achieve equality?
So that ties us back to my experience of, as I said, becoming more militant about this. So the one thing, first and foremost, is acknowledge the fact that we do not have the equality yet. Because until you do that, you'll still be a bit like, yeah, it would be good to become more equal, or, more, 50-50 balanced in each team or whatever. But then when you've actually acknowledged that, like, we are unequal, then you've acknowledged the problem, and then you start attacking it. Then you're like, oh, I'm gonna premiere. Is that the right English word? I'm not sure. I'm gonna help this happen. I'm not just gonna be like aware. I'm gonna start attacking a problem.
Yeah.
So I would encourage every man and woman, but especially men then, to, because I don't think it's a problem. That's the thing, for women to acknowledge that there is inequality. Because if you're on the losing end of inequality, you feel it. If you're on the winning end of inequality, it's harder to feel it, right? One, you can't make people feel like we're unequal. So you have +2 and I have -2, and you're gonna give me your +2. So you're gonna be worse off, and then we're both gonna be at 0.
Yeah.
You have to frame the discussion to be, you're at +2, I'm at -2. We can both be at +2 if we just change some things, if we just agree that this is how we want our society. That I would say is the main thing. And then, like, secondly, yeah, there has to be more of a, or we should strive to have more of a, how do we fix this problem together and for society? So yeah, I think for many men it's just hard to figure out where to get started to help. Like for myself, I had to read a book alone without anyone telling me anything before I felt like, okay, I understand the problem now. I think I know some ways to act upon it.
I think it's about sharing the caring tasks, like when you have a family, for example. Because what you see mostly still in this day and age, when you have kids and a kid is sick, mostly the schools or the daycare call the mom. that happens, like it just happens. And then you see mostly that women go home because they have to take care of that kid. So that's like one of the things that are really embedded in the society still, I think. And so I think it's the main thing is to share caring tasks. So when you start a family, discuss that you also want to have a career, that it's also, yeah, it should be super normal that you then just share the task. Like if you want to work 4 days or you don't want to bring your kids 5 days to daycare, then just if you want to bring them for 3 days, then you and your spouse should both work like 4 days, for example. You really do it with each other. Also, make sure you have a really good network for you to support you there, and just say no to certain things as well. So I think you can combine it all, and I think that's the first thing that men have to keep in mind. Start sharing those tasks, those caring tasks. And for an employer, it's also like be supportive to working moms as well, but also push those fathers. Like, hey, do you have a baby? Are you? Of course, you don't have to put your personal opinion up to them, but please make it discussable. That you say, hey, do you also share the caring task at home? And do you feel supported there? Because we as a company can support you, and we want to make sure that there's a right balance for you and your whole family.
First of all, it's important to be aware of it, and some of the drivers as well, and so like that's like the most important thing, whether you're an individual contributor or a manager or a hiring manager, is being aware that there's something, and quite often it is often unconscious as well, and I think if you are interviewing in roles, make sure that you are aware about it. And it could be for instance, making sure that you have a gender diverse hiring panel, other ways that you can sort of treat that as well. I think that's really important to understand, that even if you often don't think that you don't have prejudices, but be aware that it can happen. And it could be that you just have an all men hiring panel, or an all male team, and be really aware of that. I think is the first step about doing it. And once you're aware about it, it's much, you can then put things in place to be able to make sure that you are as diverse as possible in your decision making as well. We should be and it obviously is definitely the case in a number of industries and a number of roles in particular industries where the percentage of men is so much higher than women. I think we absolutely should be addressing that, and and raising it as a problem, and trying to do our part as a business to fix that. And it's like, it could be the industry as a whole has a problem with it, but if individual companies don't raise it as a problem, then the industries itself aren't going to change as well.
I think that it needs to continue to be intentional, and I think that men can continue to be open to listening to the experiences that we could all share individually or collectively. We all have stories, and I think listening is probably the most powerful thing that a man can do. And then advocating is like right up there too. Is like, pipe up if you hear something or you see something, or you're in a room and you're like, hey, like there are only guys here, like maybe say something, because it matters, and vocalizing holds weight, and it is probably one of the most powerful ways to continue to evolve and change and welcome women, create spaces where women feel welcome.
So if you're a man who happens to have a big voice, who is tends to take up space in meetings and be given that platform, actually using that power to say, hey, we haven't heard from Claire in this meeting, Claire, what do you want to say, actually is incredibly powerful. So it's no longer you putting yourself out there, it's being invited into the conversation. That's the difference between so diversity is like you being in the room, but inclusion is somebody actually bringing you into that conversation.
How does working with women enhance your experience in the workplace?
So I think working in teams where there are women, I think it definitely changes the kind of vibe in a team setting. And I've heard this from many male colleagues as well, who have been, you know, in kind of all male teams. And then they've also told me about like the difference that happens when even one female member joins. So it kind of changes the dynamic in the team, and can kind of like help to control some of that more, let's say, macho behavior that might come out sometimes in like all male settings. So I think you know, having those diverse teams, they can definitely improve, you know, the overall atmosphere of teams, and make sure that, you know, different kinds of ways of communicating, of being, are acceptable.
For me, a well functioning and a good functioning team is one that is diverse. You know, you have just better ideation, better, you know, better ideas, better, you know, overall a better functioning team and business is one that has, you know, ideas coming from many different backgrounds of people, whether that be, you know, age, race, gender, like, you know, you name it. And I think, you know, like, it's, you know, if you find that you become too sort of like sort of indexed over into one side, you could often quite find that, you know, generally like your ideas may also kind of be indexed very much over to one side as well. And I think, you know, we're like, particularly in our business, you know, we're building a diverse marketplace of celebrity talents that people know and love across the world. And, you know, that should also represent, you know, the different sort of like demographics in the world as well, you know. And I think so if we were to do this and we were to have, you know, like a very male heavy team, for instance, you know, we could then end up with a very male heavy talent supply base, which would then really impact our customer base as well. And so like, really, I think to like succeed as a business, I think this is also really important for us as well.
I would say, I mean, the first thing that springs to mind is when I first joined Memo. Memo's, it's a remote first company, which means a lot of people work from home, which is a huge benefit, and also, you know, sometimes a challenge because it can feel a bit lonely. It can, you know, you have to really consciously try and find those connections. And the first thing that springs to mind is that when I joined Memo, one of the first people that I spoke to was you. And actually, you made me feel so welcome. You helped me understand a bit about like how the company worked and some of the, you know, the background, and made me feel like, oh, I already have like somebody here who's a friendly face. I feel like we spoke on like day 2 or something. It was really early. And I think that's really indicative of what women in the workplace can mean, because it's not just that they are you know, amazing, smart, creative people, you know, who contribute like a huge amount from a business point of view. But what I tend to find with the women that I work with and I've worked with is that they're your champions and your support network, and the people who, you know, check in on you like weirdly at just the right time when you're having a bad day and you kind of just really need someone to talk to. And that's been, you know, my experience of women at work is people who are there for you and make it feel more kind of human and make you feel more connected. And that's not to say, you know, the men that we work with are also brilliant, and you know, I've also got some of those relationships with men, but the really deep connections I found have been with women that I've worked with.